Imam al-Ghazali in his Ihya gives us material through which we can understand the various levels of Iyyaka na'budu wa Iyyaka nasta'in. To recap, we said previously that all ibadah is encompassed in these two statements, Iyyaka na'bud wa Iyyaka nasta'in. The problem is we don't quite understand how to get there. So there are several steps to that. First, we have to delineate, understand what are the different categories of Iyyaka na'budu wa Iyyaka nasta'in. So he talks about fasting as falling into three categories. He calls it Siyamul Amma, Siyamul Khawas, and Siyamul Akhass al Khawas. The fasting of the generality, the fasting of the elite, and the fasting of the super elite. When I looked at that, it reminded me of a different way in which one could also understand what he is trying to express, which is the fasting of the body, the fasting of the mind, and the fasting of the soul. There is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wherein he says, رُبَّ صَائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ حَظٌ فِي صِيَامِهِ إِلَّا الْجُوعُ وَالْعَطْشُ. He says, many a person who is fasting benefits from the fast no more than a kind of deprivation from food and drink. In other words, all other dimensions of his or her life just go on as normal. So you can see clearly there that this is a reference to the fasting of the body. When the mind is involved, then there is a concerted effort on my part and your part to avoid that which we engage in normally. Watching TV, for instance, which, if looked at in one light, is acceptable, except in the month of Ramadan, because you want to hold yourself to a higher standard. So you disengage from your normal activities. Watching too much sports. Why? Because it takes away from the time you could spend in Qira'atul Quran. So you can see there is a deliberate effort on your part to disengage and to do those things that will attune you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for the fasting of the spirit, it begins with a focus on Allah, and you break your fast whilst maintaining that focus, which obviously is a very difficult thing to do. It goes well beyond just depriving one's body of food and drink. It goes beyond simply avoiding those practices that you and I engage in normally. It is an all-encompassing focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on His majesty, and so on. Which brings us finally to that hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, wherein he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Akhbirni anil Islam," and tell me about Islam. This is what Islam has to do with the externalities. It is an emblem of your belonging. It's like an ID card. Without it, you're not considered a Muslim. He says, "Akhbirni anil Iman," and tell us about Iman. Iman is to believe with conviction in Allah and the angels and so on. All of these things that you and I have been taught as children, that's your Iman. The final day, the day of reckoning. And then finally he gets to "Akhbirni anil Ihsan." And this kind of just ties everything up. He says, "Tell me about Ihsan." He says, "Ihsan is an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu, fa in lam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak." It is to worship Allah as if you can actually behold Him, you can see Him. And if you haven't quite reached that stage, then you too would still be considered a muhsin if you are fully aware that He is watching over you and He can see you. So whilst this is put backwards, the highest stage is for you to be able to envision Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you're not there yet, then you should look at Him as being watchful over you. And we don't quite know how to do that. We need guidance. And so that takes us to the third part of the verse, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Inshallah, we'll talk about that tomorrow.